This is my story on how a bad idea that me and two of my friends had on a Sunday afternoon led me on a 5-month engineering journey to design not only a version 1, but a version 2 of a camera stabilizer for tracking cars. Follow along and I'll show you all the different changes made from version 1 to version 2, and I'll even show you how I constructed it. This is the version 0. It is not an arm at all, it's just a simple mesh stabilizer to remove high frequency vibrations from the road. The performance of this was really outstanding actually. You could get mostly usable shots with almost no rigging required at all. This is just attached to the car with 2 ratchet straps and a 2x2-inch aluminum pole. This is the version 1 of the arm. Generally, the performance of this arm was pretty good. The main reason for a version 2 is actually that when the car was not moving and there was a crosswind, the whole arm would sway back and forth just a little bit because of the play in the bearings and the washers. The biggest upgrade from version 1 to version 2 is just removing the side-to-side play of the whole arm, and that version 2 was designed to be easy to make at home with minimal tools. For the most part, version 1 was able to get almost 100% clean shots at 70mm, but anything past that was unusable basically. This is the first shot of version 2, and version 2 is definitely 100% usable at 70mm, and is very usable at 100mm. There's a shot in here of 150mm, and you can tell that it's a little shaky, but I would still call it usable. Really just dependent on the road conditions. Version 2 is also a lot beefier, can hold a lot heavier of camera packages, and is generally just more robust and well built than version 1. And here's that shot I was talking about where you see a little shake at 150mm. Some of these little jitters that can be seen here, I have a suspicion that changing up things on the high frequency stabilizer could remove those, but I still need to do more testing. This is that first setup that you were seeing. It's just a little mesh high frequency remover and a pole, and that's basically it. This is the version 1 arm before it was painted on the first day of testing. It's pretty rough, and as you can see, it still actually has that high frequency isolator that's just like a mesh, a very long mesh with a lot of slop in it. And this setup generally works pretty well. When constructing the version 2, I used these 3 engineering drawings to build the main pieces. And then after they're built, I spray painted them black. Here's where I got ahead of myself and painted before I actually had drilled the holes big enough. So I'm drilling a little larger so the bolts will fit through. And here is using rivets to actually hold these flange bearings on. These bearings are definitely not by any means the best bearings you can get, but because of how the whole system is built, if the bearings fail, the whole system can't just fall to the ground, it falls back on the metal frame. Next, I drilled a 5/16 hole through the center of a 1/2-inch round aluminum 6061 bar and cut it to 3 1/4 inches and used that for the spacers between the 2 arms. Next, I took 1/2-inch square tubing that had a hole through the center and cut it to 7 inches long, and then threaded a 10mm bolt into it, and that's what you see there as where the arm is actually adjustable. The last piece is actually where the spring connects to the bolt, and here is the engineering diagram for that. It's made out of that same 1/2-inch steel tubing. You might have noticed that the 40/40 aluminum extrusion was not actually in the diagrams. This is something that I substituted in because I had it already and I just wanted to save some money. For version 1 and version 2, this is how I did the tension adjustment. You loosen those two bolts and then slide the rod up and down. As mentioned before, the rigging for version 0 is just a 2x2 inch aluminum pole that the whole system connects to that is ratcheted to the roof. For version 1, I made this mount that allows me to connect a 2-inch tube upward, and then I was using a bike rack to stabilize that for the time being, and that worked pretty well. It was pretty sturdy. For version 2, I used that same mount again, but then this time I use a roof rack and some 2-inch tubing to create triangles and make it really rigid to the car. And on top of that, we used a ratchet strap to ratchet the roof rack down to make sure it wasn't going anywhere. Having already owned a roof rack, all these extras and pipes only cost me about $200, so the system is pretty cheap in general. This is me bolting on the version 2 of the high frequency isolator that has some extra weights mounted to it for more stabilization. And then here's just mounting the entire rig to the car. When you shake it, it pretty much shakes the whole car, so it's pretty rigidly attached. In the bio, there's a link to this list that has all the parts needed, and the total cost coming out to $268. Plus, the $200 spent for rigging comes out to just under $500 for this whole setup. The only real mistake I made was those 10mm holes are supposed to be 10mm tapped holes. And the tap that I have has a drill bit size labeled on it that is just totally wrong. So when I used that size, the holes could not be tapped. So I ended up forcing 10mm bolts through those holes. Because of this, I had to add some spacers, which increased the cost a little bit. So if you tap those holes correctly, you should not have that problem, and you can use the bolts that are listed on the parts list in the description.